ونفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما وإخلاصا وتوفيقا يا أكرم الأكرمين. نويت التعلم والتعليم وتذكر والتذكير، النفع والانتفاع والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم، الدعاء إلى الهدى والدلال على الخير، ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. La ilaha illallah. Last class we were talking about Imam Ghazali radiallahu anhu and his masterpiece work, the revival of the religious sciences. Imam Ghazali has also written other books, Bidayatul Hidayah, the beginning of guidance, Minhajul Abidin, the way of the worshippers. All of them have been translated. Bidayatul Hidayah is probably, you can say like it's a very extremely abridged version of the revival of the religious sciences. Generally speaking, like the Habaib, the scholars of Tarim, that's the book that they constantly, it's not something that they study one time and that's it. It's something they constantly begin and start again. And it's something they even travel with a lot. They actually carry on their journeys and travel whenever they get a chance as well. I think that's the lovely thing about the Habaib, right? Even when they're 60, 70 years old, they've always got a copy of Bidayatul Hidayah. They're always carrying it with them as well. And Habib Umar has probably taught Bidayatul Hidayah hundreds of times now, I think. There's never a Roha class that he does or, with the students, except someone's doing that book. Whether it's Ibtidaiya, like they have different stages, right? So that's one book they're constantly just going over again and again and again. And before one obviously jumps into the revival of the religious sciences, that's the book that you start off with. It's like the stepping stone. And then Minhajul Abidin is the last book Ghazali actually authored. So that in there, that's basically he's summarized all of the religious revival of the religious sciences and put that in there. Minhajul Abidin. It's a bit of a difficult book though. Minhajul Abidin. Bidayatul Hidayah though, that's something we all should aspire to, make it even like a daily wird. Last class I mentioned the habit in Tarim. Ihya Ulumuddin is something that in my time there, I think Habib's taught it at least 7 or 8 times, yes. Now the brand new edition of it is a 10-volume book, and each volume is about 500 pages, so it's about this thick. Habib's at least taught it, and when I say taught, I mean from beginning to end, minimum about 10 times a year. Right, and something is constantly just going over again and again and again. Aidarus, the great Aidarus we mentioned last class as well, they say he almost memorized it. The amount, he just kept on going over it again and again and again. He said if the dead came back to life, the only thing that they would counsel you is Ghazali's book, Ihya. La ilaha illallah. And there's, alhamdulillah, there's good translations of it now as well. Islamic Text Society, I'm not sure if they've completed it off or not. Most of it they've translated, they have. It's better you study it, but even if you can't, Ghazali's books, man, like La ilaha illallah, there's just something powerful about it. I mean, if they're being recited to the Prophet ﷺ and he's happy with them, no question or doubt. There's a story, the famous Habib Abdurrahman Mustafa Eid Darus, he's buried in Cairo. He was from the great scholars. He once went with three of his, they were all scholars, right? They all went to the grave of the Prophet ﷺ, and they had taken a copy of Bidayatul Hidayah, and all of them made a pact there in front of the grave of the Prophet ﷺ. They go, we're all going to recite this while we're here with the intention of acting upon it. Four of them. Sheikh Jifri, Habib Bakr Bil Faqih, Sheikh Muhammad, he's from Tarim, he is, and then this famous Habib Abdurrahman. They read the whole book with that firm intention of acting upon it. All of them got big openings, and they all saw a vision of the Prophet ﷺ. He told Habib Abdurrahman to go to Cairo, stay there and give da'wah there. Habib Sheikh al-Jifri, he told him to go to Hind, the subcontinent, Malia Bar. I don't know if you heard of it. So he went there and established an institute, gave da'wah. The third one, Habib Bakr Bil Faqih, he told him to go to Java. Java is in Malaysia, Indonesia. He went there, and the fourth one came back to Tarim. He did. He started teaching there. So that's Bidayatul Hidayah. Let alone if they read like the revival of the religious sciences. So there's a lot of barakah in Imam Ghazali's books. Now at the same time, the way, the sunnah of God, there is no person that comes of piety except that he's going to have people that hate him. It's just the way it is. There's not a single prophet except people spoke bad of him or, ridiculed him and things like that. Likewise, Ghazali, radiallahu anhu, he had a lot of haters. In his lifetime, his books were burnt. Subhanallah, in his lifetime. And it's important to touch upon this, because why was it that now, almost 900 years later, everyone's singing praises, his books are spread to the corners of the earth, they're translated as well. Why was there a lot of hatred for him, especially then, right? Mainly it comes down to one thing it does. Imam Ghazali started off as a faqih, fiqh, mufti, right? So he was very much focused on the external, halal, haram, and we're going to talk about it, right? But anyways, that's how he started off. Now, in the context that Ghazali was, right, he was, you can even call him like a government scholar. He worked for the government. It wasn't that he was an independent scholar. He worked for the state, the government, and obviously when you work for the government, you're on the payroll. That's not trying to say he sold out or he gave fatwas that were necessarily wrong, but you have to understand Ghazali was a very deep thinker, right? And he noticed most of the fuqaha and the scholars, they're aspiring to be scholars because they know they're going to get a good job at the end. Like most of us now, what are the jobs out there now that everyone secures himself as safe, financial situation, right? They want to be a doctor, or they want to be a lawyer, or they want to go into politics, or, IT and things like that. Back then, the thing that was, in fashion, right, or whatever, is to become a scholar. Why? Because if you become a mufti, you're going to get close to the state. They're going to make sure they take care of you. So there was that. And also he noticed a lot of the fuqaha were not focused on purification of the heart. Now this is a very important point. This is at no way we're belittling fiqh, nor are we saying don't study it or don't give it importance. Ghazali himself wrote 4 fiqh books and usul al-fiqh books, and even when he came back after the 10-year period, he continued teaching fiqh as well. But the important thing here is fiqh at the expense of tazkiyah. That's a big problem. Ghazali knew this because he was the biggest faqih. There was no one bigger. He knew there was no focus on tazkiyah. So when he came back, especially, you notice this theme in his book here, he differentiates between what he calls the scholars of the dunya and the scholars of the next world. We all know the Prophet said, hadith sahih, that one of the first people to go to hellfire, scholar. The second person, he said, either someone who fights in the path of God or someone who recites the Quran. Another narration mentions a person that gives a lot of charity. These are the 4 things that are going to get you into Jannah. So why is it that the Prophet is mentioning these are the first 4 to go to hell? That it can take you to paradise, but if you have corrupt intentions, you want to become a scholar for fame and name and reciting Quran until, likewise. So the important thing is obviously a person has to always check himself, right? So Ghazali was noticing that there was a problem here, and that the fuqaha especially, they weren't focusing. And this is why, if you actually look at his book, The Revival of the Religious Sciences, he actually mentions Abu Hanifa, Shafi'i, Malik, and Ahmad ibn Hanbal as well. And he kind of gives their biographies. And he doesn't focus on the fiqh aspect, because it's known, tabarakallah, mashallah, they compiled made the 4 schools. Millions of people are worshipping God based on their understandings, right? But the problem is, why weren't they focusing on the fact that Shafi'i and Abu Hanifa would finish a Quran every single night? Ramadan came, they would do it twice. Most of us, if we finish a Quran in 30 days, right, La ilaha illallah, that's like Fathul Akbar is, right? But Abu Hanifa and Shafi'i, every night. Ramadan, 60 Qurans. He goes, why are they not focusing on that for? They're focusing on the fact that, mashallah, fiqh, right? But okay, every night from Isha to Fajr, he wouldn't sleep. It is known Abu Hanifa was a tajir. He was a merchant. Once he had, like, people that are into business will know this, right? Like, he had a lot. He used to sell cloth and fabric. He had a lot. And he told his, wakil, assistant, right? Like, one of them has a default in it. It's got a bit of it's a bit torn, it is. He goes, if you're going to sell the whole stack, make sure you tell him about that. But if you're going to sell it individually, he'll probably come across it. Hours later, he came back. He goes, Alhamdulillah, we made a massive profit. Thousands gold coins. He goes, did you tell him about that? He goes, no. It completely slipped my mind. He goes, you're sacked here, and all of that wealth he went and gave it to charity. He did. He didn't take a penny. We're talking about hundreds and thousands of gold coins we are. Again, why are people not focusing on that for? And so the problem isn't fiqh, the problem is these people who just focus on that one aspect only. And likewise, if tasawwuf as well, right, if there's people out there who are just focusing on that and not focusing on like the, importance of like prayer and fasting at the outward, it's extremely important, like all of the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ could be summarized to 3 things. Knowledge for the sake of God, tazkiyah, tasawwuf, purifying the heart, making sure, and the third thing is teaching it. That's like the famous prophetic trivium, you can say, right? And that's what it comes down to. And if you're doing one at the expense of the 2 others, you're always going to be, it's never going to be complete. People that just focus on da'wah, they have no knowledge and no tazkiyah. How are you going to give da'wah? How are you going to call people to God? Or you're just focused on knowledge, you don't care about the masses out there. La ilaha illallah. Or you're just focused on the tasawwuf, knowledge and teaching and spreading it. You're always going to be incomplete, and this is why there's a lot of sects out there that they're incomplete and deficient because of that. So it's extremely important. Ghazali is not sitting here and saying fiqh has no importance. He was the biggest, faqih, he was, right. It's important to understand that. But why fuqaha don't like him is because he calls them out. And a lot of them hated him because of that. Why? Because they're sitting comfortably, eating comfortably, sleeping comfortably, right? He's pointing them out. He goes, all you're concerned about is getting those jobs, making sure there's good pay and everything. There's no concern purifying the heart or anything. So that's what it comes down to. Now, from one of those scholars, he is a huge scholar, Moroccan scholar Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Hurzum. Quite difficult to pronounce his surname, but he was a huge scholar. Now, Ghazali obviously was living on the other side of the Islamic world he was. So by that time, people were spreading fabricated things about him. And then fuqaha, unfortunately, were spreading lies about him. This guy absolutely hates fiqh and he's telling people and this and that, when that's obviously incorrect. So in Morocco, he's heard all these false things about him. So he has the first copy of the revival of the religious sciences, and he gathers all the copies. So he's a big scholar, he's got a lot of following. He tells them, gather his books. Tomorrow at Jum'ah, we're going to burn them publicly. He's obviously got a massive following. After the Jum'ah prayer, he's saying, we're just going to go out, we're going to pile them up, and that's it, we're going to burn them. La ilaha illallah. That night he went to sleep. He saw the Prophet ﷺ. This is mentioned by a lot of scholars. Imam Subki mentions this. A lot of the history books, right? They mention this. Subki is Kafi, mashallah. He's a huge scholar in his tabaqat, right? Subki says that this great scholar saw the Prophet ﷺ and Abu Bakr. Umar and Abu Bakr. And next to them, Ghazali was there. So Imam Ghazali then looks at the Prophet and goes, Ya Rasulullah, it's him. Ibn Hurzaham, it's him. He's the one that's saying false accusations and he's going to burn my book. Because Ghazali then turns and goes, Ya Rasulullah, if I've done anything incorrect, or I've said anything incorrect, then okay, tell me now, I'll do tawbah. If not, I want him punished. He's spreading lies about me, accusations about me. We all know, obviously, from yesterday's story as well, the Prophet looked at his book. But anyways, Ghazali gives a book to him. Prophet opens it, looks at it from beginning to end. From beginning to end. He goes, Inna hadha la shay'un hasan. He goes, this is magnificent. He gives it to Abu Bakr. Umar's there as well. He looks at it. This is excellent book. Then after that, the Prophet said, yeah, he needs to be punished. Fabricating, lying against people, that's a grave, one of the major sinful acts. False accusations, right? So one of them then got a stick, and they took his clothes off from behind and they whipped him. La ilaha illallah. When they got to the fifth one, Sayyidina Abu Bakr stepped him and goes, Ya Rasulullah, can we just stop there? He goes like, maybe false information got to him and he misunderstood. Because there's certain people out there, they don't really care, false information or not, they just hate someone. They're ready to believe anything bad about him, not verify, confirm it, and just spread it. He goes, maybe for him it's not the case. And it's not. He genuinely thought Ghazali was saying this right. The Prophet looked at Ghazali. Ghazali said, okay, stop. When this great Imam woke up, he was actually in pain. He looked at the back and the marks were down his back. La ilaha illallah. He came out the next day, Jum'ah time, he did tawbah. He goes, any false beliefs I had about Imam Ghazali, I take them back. He's from the Salihin, he's from the righteous and whatnot. And they say after that, he used to cry a lot. Regretted it a lot that, I didn't know. Every night he used to make dua. They say sometime later he's sort of Prophet again. And the Prophet wiped with his blessed hands on his back and the pain went. The marks didn't go down. The pain went. Because even months later, it was hurting him still. And when they buried him, when they were doing the coffin, they noticed the marks. You know how you get a scar? Pain will eventually go, right? The scars did. And this is why, talking bad about the man of God, lucky for him, he got his punishment here, right? Because if you don't get punished here, then you're going to get punished there. And this is why La ilaha illallah, Imam Ghazali, radiallahu anhu, is from those great men of God he is, and his books have a lot of barakah as well. So, inshallah, we'll begin with his book then. So we're going to be focusing on the inner dimensions or the spiritual aspects of fasting. Ghazali, radiallahu anhu, we mentioned he's split the book up into 4 parts. Rub'ul ibadat, Rub'ul adat, Rub'ul muhlikat, and Rub'ul munjiyat. And each of these 4 has 10 books in it. So 10, 20, 30, and 40. The first the first quarter is about worship. So he talks about like prayer, fasting, Hajj, and things like this. Within there, he focuses more on the spiritual aspects of fasting. Because again, he was, with him, the fiqh of fasting, it was quite known, it was, especially in his day and age. No one was focusing on the spiritual aspects. The Prophet ultimately came with both the outward as well as the internal, the external and the spiritual. So this is inshallah what we're going to be focusing on. I don't have an English copy to put up here for the people that are following. I don't have a PDF of it to share screen with, but it's been translated. It has. I think Islamic Text Society has translated it. Also, someone else I think has translated it as well. So he begins off by saying, Kitab Asrar al-Sawm wa Muhimmati, the secrets of fasting and its importance. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah alladhi a'zama ala ibadihi al-minna lamma dafa'a anhum kayd ash-shaytan wa fanna wa radda amalahu wa hayyaba dhanna idh ja'ala sawma hisnan li awliyaihi wa جنة وفتلهم به أبواب الجنة وعرفهم أن وسيلة الشيطان إلى قلوبهم الشهوات المستكنة. So he says, praise belongs to God who has favored his slaves. Now obviously when the scholars begin off the introduction, it always has to relate back to the topic that we're talking about. So here we're talking about fasting, right? So he begins off praising God that has favored his slaves. How? Right? He says because he's warded away from them the traps of the shaitan. So he's basically saying that the purpose of fasting and one of the goals of fasting that it prevents the devil having a strong effect on you. And we obviously know that when Ramadan comes in, the devils are all locked up. The only devil that is not locked up is the shaitan. So the devil's got armies of devils working for him. It's not just one shaitan out there, no. He's got millions of devils that work for him. There's a famous hadith that even mentions that the shaitan, his throne is on the ocean. And each day the devils come to him and tell him, they all want to suck up to him, right? So they're trying to please him. So he says, okay, tell me what good you've done. One says, oh, well, I got someone to drink alcohol. He says, okay, well, that's okay, I guess. The other one, he goes, I got him to astaghfirullah, steal and whatnot. He goes, okay. They're all trying to, and then one of them turns around and says, I got a married couple to break up. He goes, Khalas, you're close to me. Come over here. He gets him to sit, takes his, what's it called? Crown off and puts on his head. La ilaha illallah. That's causing corruption between people, hatred between people as well. That's the devil's even happy with something like that. So the point over here is when Ramadan comes in, the entire month, all of them are locked up, apart from him. All of them are locked up. He's not locked up because even on the Badr obviously happened in Ramadan, it did, 17th, right? The Prophet ﷺ smiled at one point and they said, Ya Rasulullah, what happened? He goes, the shaitan's letting a scream out. Because when he saw that the Muslims won the battle, 313, 1,000 of them, right? For him, he knew they're not going to win, but when he saw that he let a scream out. So that's why the scholars say the shaitan, he's not locked up. But the millions of his helpers, all of them are locked up there. Okay, so this is also a big blessing from God, right? You don't have that excuse anymore. Shaitan's making me, I'm getting bad thoughts. No. The realities of people become evident to them in Ramadan. You can't turn around and say, well, I'm getting bad thoughts. If you're getting bad thoughts, that's not the devil's anymore. You got some serious problems. So problem is, right, one of the scholars once, the way he put it is like, you've got a car. Someone every day is getting a bat and just gently hitting the car. Obviously, it's going to get dented. 11 months is going to be a huge dent in the car. The 1 month you take off, you're not hitting it. There's still a big dent in the car. You can't expect Ramadan's going to come, mashallah, you're going to change significantly. No. There's still a dent in the car. You need to take that 1 month now and make sure you actually fix it. So it's helpful in the sense that there's no devils there. But it just means that you need to work hard before they come back out again. Okay, so alhamdulillah, in the month of Ramadan, the trap of the shaitan and his hopes are cut off. Because he knows that, his thousands of workers that would have helped him take people astray and whatnot, they can't anymore. And he's made fasting hisnan li awliyaihi wa junnah. Fasting is a fortress. Fasting is a fortress for those people that know how to fast and what's expected of them. As for if you don't know the purpose of fasting and what's the goal behind it, then it's not going to be a fortress. And this is why Ghazali is going to go and speak about the different levels. There's fasting of the awam, unfortunately, and they're just hungry and thirsty. That's all. And that's not, and the Prophet ﷺ, often hear people say, right, I'm going to get married when I'm 25, I am. I said, how come? He goes, because the Prophet ﷺ got married when he's 5, right? So I'm following that. I said, no, the Prophet ﷺ specifically addressed the young people, and I said, Ya ma'shar al-shabab, youngsters, those of you that can get married, let them do so. And if they can't, fast, because fasting for him it's a fortress, like it's protection. So here it's not sunnah to get married when you're 25. He specifically said youngsters. Youngsters here when you're teenager you are. Now obviously, there's a lot behind that. Most of the scholars, when they commentate on that, they say those who are financially able to. Those who are financially able to. They should get married. If you're not financially able to, fast. Most of us, if we look at our parents, right, they will go married when they're 15, maximum 20, right? And even then, back then it was like nobody would get married when 20. Any traditional society, they all got married when they're 13 or 12 or 15. Even if you go to non-Muslim traditional societies, places like Africa, girls get married when they're 15. And just, the lifestyle, I guess, has changed us as well. But there's a lot of things, just because the world has changed, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to change. Like, don't go with the tide. It worked for centuries, and suddenly what? You've come up with a new way you have. This is why there's a lot of problem. People get married when they're 30, then most of them complain they don't have children. It's because 30 is retirement. 15, they got married, they're having children, and then there's complications, and then there's diets and change as well. But I don't know, I just think, we definitely need to think about this all over again. If we can get our children married at a young age, the Habaib still, did they get the kids married when they're 18? It's not the end of the world. And what I like about that system there is they bring them into the house. The parents are obviously supervising the marriage, making sure it all goes well, until the first couple of years. And then after that, if they want to go stand on their own 2 feet or so. I don't know. There's arguments now for everything. Well, they're 20 years old. They don't know how to think straight. They're not mature enough yet. But marriage will mature them. Help them get married as parents. Help them mature, and then. Otherwise, forced youngsters, teenagers, La ilaha illallah, forced. Don't be eating lahm all the time, and La ilaha illallah. Ghazali talks about a lot in depth of that as well. Obviously, this is not the time, nor the class, right? But fasting then. So he said that fasting is a fortress. Fasting is a fortress. And the man of God mentioned this. When the stomach is empty, the limbs are satiated. But when the stomach is a full stomach, the limbs are hungry. Then you start looking and wondering with your eyes and your ears and your hand, and and Ghazali goes into a lot of depth into this, breaking the 2 shahwatain, the desire of the stomach and the desire of the private parts. He goes into a lot of depth. Now, so fasting obviously definitely helps with that. وَفَتَحَ لَهُمْ بِأَبْوَابِ الْجَنَّةِ, and God opened for them the doors of Jannah. We all know in the month of Ramadan that all doors of the paradise are open. Now, what's meant by that, the scholars define in the understanding. One understanding is that the mercy of God is open. Like, it's much more in Ramadan than outside of Ramadan. Another understanding is it's easier for a person to get into Jannah. All doors, that's what it stands for. Some scholars have gone with the opinion that if a Muslim dies in Ramadan, automatically he's going to go to Jannah, because the doors of hell are closed, right? So there's nowhere else. But there's a difference on that. Some say no. It just means you're not going to be punished for Ramadan. And then once the next month comes in, then you're possibly going to be punished again. La ilaha illallah. طيب وعرفهم أن وسيلة الشيطان إلى قلوبهم الشهوات المستكنة. God has taught us that the way that the devil gets to us is by shahwa, having desires is the way the devil gets to us. But he can't get to us while we're fasting. Why? Because we can't eat. We desire to eat, we can't eat. We desire to drink, we can't drink. We lack energy to think about anything else. That's the whole point is. That you're generally either you're so tired you don't have energy to think about anything haram, and if you do, mate, you got big problems. So, so the devil can't get to you while you're fasting. But then there's some people, even the devil looks at him and says, I need to learn from you, that. Even when they're fasting or not fasting. I heard Sheikh Hamza, met him in Mauritania once, alhamdulillah, when we were there time ago. He had come for a day and he goes, I'm telling you, there's people now, even the shaitan looks up to them. They're like, where did you come up with that from? Even I haven't thought of that. La ilaha illallah. So fasting, no fasting. But the point here is that if you fast and you strive and you learn the purpose of it and what's expected from you, then it's definitely going to have a positive effect. And that's why he's saying over here, وَأَنَّ بِكَمْعِهَا تُصْبِحُ النَّفْسُ الْمُطْمَئِنَّةِ. The nafs of a person, all of us has a nafs, right? There's 7 levels that the nafs, in the Quran is mentioned about 3 or 4. When he says, إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ, it's mentioned that my nafs is constantly calling me towards bad things. That's the lowest type of nafs out there. That your nafs is just constantly bombarding you bad. Then there's nafsul lawwama, is mentioned in the Quran as well. This is the stage where you're on the path to recovery. Your nafs is always reprimanding you. You might have done something, later on you felt a bit bad. Your consciousness is telling you, come on, bro, you shouldn't have done that, you shouldn't have said that, you shouldn't have. You're like, yeah, okay. Most of the time we ignore it. Most of us hate having these serious conversations with ourselves, or whatever. These are the battles that you have having with yourself. Why did you talk to your dad like that for? Yeah, no, okay, don't. You just kind of. That's what most of us do. But if you seriously, like actually spoke to yourself, right, you would stop it straight away. You would be like, yeah, astaghfirullah, that's wrong, I'm going to let go. But most of us don't. That's the second category. Nafsul lawwama is constantly telling you, don't do that, wrap around you. Then after that, tabarakallah, there's nafsul mutma'inna, radiya, mardiya, they mentioned in the Quran as well. So these, and then there's a person gets to such tazkiyah of his nafs, right, is always just constantly telling him good things. It doesn't even think about bad after that. He said the way you're going to start this off is you have to, the shahawat, the lowly desires you have to completely destroy them. That's the only, otherwise there's no other. You just have to let go of all those lowly desires. Then he says, وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ قَائِدِ الْخَلْقِ وَمُمَهِّدِ السُّنَّةِ وَعَلَى آلِهِ وَأَصْحَابِهِ ذَوِي الْآرَاءِ الثَّاقِبَةِ وَالْعُقُولِ الْمُرْجِحِينَ وَسَلَّمْ تَسْلِيمًا كَثِيرًا. Always, whenever you're beginning of books as well, after praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is always preferred to send salutation on the Prophet ﷺ. There is no tazkiyah without him. God sent him to do tazkiyah. Yuzakkihim, specifically mentioned in the Quran. And tazkiyah has been mentioned before knowledge. Yuzakkihim wa yu'allimuhum. That's what the Quran actually mentions. That we send the messenger لِيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. That knowledge of the book and anything else is on the precondition that you purify it. Because what does God mention in Baqarah? ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى Who? The Quran is a guidance for Huda. He says لِلْمُتَّقِينَ, the people of taqwa. That means there's no guidance for anyone else. The first prerequisite, if the Quran is a source of guidance for you, you need to have taqwa. And then he mentions further on a couple of pages, يُضِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا وَيَهْدِي بِهِ كَثِيرًا. He sends astray by the Quran many people. وَيَهْدِي بِهِ كَثِيرًا. And he guides loads by virtue of the Quran as well. And that's why the Prophet's job was to give tazkiyah, and he did not pass away, sallallahu alaihi wasallam Muhammad, except that he gave tazkiyah to all of his companions. And if you think otherwise, then you've got a sick heart, and you need to, rectify that. Because if you're saying there's a problem with the family of the Prophet and the companions, you're basically saying that the Prophet didn't complete of their tazkiyah. And that's why he was the greatest of spiritual doctors, and he did tazkiyah, and he continues to. By learning him, ultimately, Ghazali, where is he getting this knowledge from? Is ultimately all the teachings of the Prophet ﷺ. So ultimately there's no tazkiyah without him. Then he's going to start talking about, now we're going to get into it, the nitty-gritty stuff and the important stuff, inshallah. We'll leave that for next class. It's a bit tight for time now. Fatiha ila ruh Imam Ghazali and the awliya and the salihin ba'alihi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala each and Fatiha lakum al-maratu lillahi khasa khilaf al-maratu wa sahha kanziya salmani abni iftuh hamda haqq maradu fina fi khilaf afiyas al-Fatiha ila hadrat al-Nabi Muhammad al-Fatiha. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Nastaghfirullah. Nas'aluka al-jannata wa na'udhu bika minan nar. Nashhadu an la ilaha illallah. Nastaghfirullah. Nas'aluka al-jannata ونعوذ بك من النار نشهد أن لا إله إلا الله نستغفر الله نسألك الجنة ونعوذ بك من النار اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا يا كريم. استودعكم الله.